Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session. I apologize. I've been a little bit under the weather, so my voice is gone, but we're going to power through it. It's going to be great. This is the first time I'm talking today, so happy to be here. Happy for all of you to be here. I'm super excited about the hackathon. Appreciate all of you being able to join. In today's session, what we're really going to cover is what you need to know to be successful in the hackathon. What information do we have available to you? What resources do we have available to you? And then just any questions that you might have. And once again, this is going to be ongoing and iterative. Obviously, we're kicking off today, but the hackathon runs through the 27th of June. So you have a lot of time to ideate, get creative, connect with other people within the hackathon, and obviously spread this with your network as well if there's others that you think might be interested in participating. So let's dive into the agenda for today's call just to level set. So first, we're going to do a welcome from our Diagrid founders, Yaron and Mark. They're going to talk a little bit about the context of Diagrid, how we relate to Dapr, and how Dapr has evolved and why we're doing this hackathon. Then we're going to talk about a couple of different areas. We're talking about getting prepared. We're going to talk about getting connected, how you can get resources. We're going to do a slight upskilling just to make sure that we're all on the same foundational page in terms of what Dapr is, what agents are, what workflows are, what access you might need for resources to get up and running. And then we're going to talk about what you need to do to actually get hacking since today's a kickoff. So I'm going to pass it over at this point to Mark and Yaron. If the two of you can just introduce yourselves, provide a little bit of context to the participants as to who you are. And then after this, we'll dive into a slide kind of talking about Diagrid and Dapr.
Well, thanks, Kendall. I'll go first here. My name is Mark Fussell. I'm the CEO at Diagrid here. Started the Dapr project along with Yaron over 6 years ago now, when we had that fantastic thoughts when we were sitting there, when we were both working at Microsoft. And now we've seen it grown into this incredible project with thousands of users and tens of thousands of companies using it all. So, super excited to be here today. I'll hand over to you, Yaron.
Thanks, Mark. My name is Yaron Schneider, CTO and co-founder here at Diagrid. We started Diagrid in 22. I spent some time at Microsoft, mostly focused on open source and serverless container platforms prior to starting the company. Today, Diagrid, we're working with lots of major enterprises from retail to healthcare to manufacturing to government on their Dapr adoption journey. So yeah, pleased to be here and welcome you into our amazing Dapr AI hackathon.
Yeah, I mean, this hackathon is super exciting. I mean, personally, seeing workflow being introduced into Dapr was a game changer for us. We introduced Dapr because we saw this need for developers to build distributed applications across all of these compute platforms. Pretty much nowadays, that's become Kubernetes as the default platform that people run on. But when it gets down to it all, you as a developer there have to build all of these distributed systems patterns, and it became boilerplate code, particularly communication around pub sub messaging and service invocation, how you do request for reply calls, state management. But the thing that ties it all together in my mind, the thing that brings them together, is the workflow saga pattern, how you coordinate across lots of distributed services. And for me, this is a key piece of all that. Isn't that to you, Yaron? I mean, workflow is just super key in terms of the business value.
Yeah, for sure. Ever since we started the project, we always knew workflow was going to come at some point, and it did. It's a very major undertaking because workflows really power a lot of critical systems, like payments for large banks, and its usage essentially grows and needs to handle a lot of complexity and also be able to handle scale. And so it took a while to get into stable mode, but it is, and we're seeing with the rise of AI, it's really pushing a lot of workflow usage, because AI and agentic workflows are essentially built on top of workflows, and a lot of stuff out there today is not durable, it's not persistent, doesn't have state. But with Dapr and Dapr Agents in particular, you can actually get very stateful workflows, which I believe is a crucial part when taking AI workloads and actually putting them into production. So yes, workflows is great for line of business apps, but it's also awesome for new and up and coming AI workloads.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing in terms of the changing developer landscape now. Much of the code that used to be right as sort of procedural code, pieces of it now can be replaced by language models, and actually just other models, not just language models. That's why we introduced inside the last release the conversation API, so you can actually hook up any underlying language model and start to use it all. And then that can be used as part of your workflow engine, of course, along with the other APIs. And then as Yaron pointed out, our agentic Dapr agents that builds on top of workflow, so brings that all together as well. And for us, we see agentic systems as just another way of building distributed applications. In fact, I think all the core value prop that's been building in Dapr over the years is kind of come to the fore now with agentic systems and language models, and it's incredibly well positioned. In fact, I think Dapr Agents is probably going to be, one of the best examples of how you can build reliable, long-running distributed agents that have memory, that can be reliable, can be resilient, and also extremely performant. And I think that's something I'm very excited about.
And one last thing for me, we're calling upon all developers to help us develop Dapr Agents and contribute to the project. We already have a lot of contributions coming in. The usage is definitely growing. We've added MCP support. We're now looking to add support for Google's A2A protocol. So if anyone has knowledge about that specifically, we maintainers are more than happy to talk to you. And yes, please ping us on every forum you can. Discord would be a great way, but also, coming into Dagrid, contact us. You can get us, and we'd love to talk to you about how we can better position you as a new contributor to Dapr Agents and workflows.
Yep. So welcome to the hackathon, and we're super glad to have you all here. And back to you, Kendall.
Yeah, sure. So just wanted to give some context, and Mark, feel free to chime in here, but I wanted to now bridge the gap a little bit between Dapr and Diagrid, right? So we've talked about Dapr, we've also talked about Diagrid, but would either of you just want to elaborate on sort of what your vision was when you created Diagrid and what we're doing here that's differentiated from just the open source project?
Yeah, I can take that, Mark, while I answer some questions in chat.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, where we saw Diagrid going is exactly this. We saw the fact that you needed a trusted partner in order to build and develop on top of Dapr. Diagrid is your trusted partner in terms of we provide tooling support and we provide APIs for you to be able to build distributed applications using Dapr. But we have, for example, not only are the core maintainers of the Dapr project, but we have our Diagrid Enterprise offering that allows you to manage and have support for Dapr open source, including our Conductor tool that allows you to do operations support around that. Catalyst is our platform play. Catalyst is where you don't have to manage and think about Dapr open source. You simply deploy Catalyst, a Catalyst project, and now you can take advantage of the Dapr APIs, including workflow and including pub/sub messaging from wherever you choose to run your compute. And that's the easiest way by far to consume Dapr. And then just to get you going and get you kicked off, we introduced this this week, a workflow composer. The workflow composer allows you to take a diagram, literally a drawn diagram of your own, and generate workflow code from that, which gets you production ready code ready to get started with your POC or even take it into your actual project. So for us, we see the suite of products that we provide, and we're here to provide support, guidance, and direction, as well as maintainers of the Dapr project.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you both for being here. Thank you for supporting the hackathon. Obviously, there's a lot of time and investment and financial support that goes into this. So super excited that we're going to be able to empower Dapr developers and Catalyst users to get an opportunity to try out and play with these new technologies and win money to do it. So let's dive a little bit into the hackathon. Once again, feel free to ask questions throughout. Mark and Yaron will be here. We also have some members of the team that are here as well. So let's talk a little bit about me. If you haven't met me before, I recognize some of you from the previous hackathon, which is exciting. I'm really happy to see you back here and excited to engage with you again. I am kind of your go-to point of contact if you have issues throughout the hackathon. If something's broken, if you need help, feel free to just break glass and reach out to me directly. I've put all of these in links, so I'm going to send this out as a PDF. So it should be very easy for you. I'll also upload it to the main GitHub repo where everything lives, but it should make it really easy if you just need to click in, access my email, me on Discord, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever it might be. Feel free to reach out to me directly and ask anything that you need to know. So this is just really for your reference. I'm still a product manager here at Diagrid, as I was before for Diagrid Catalyst. Prior to this, I also worked at Microsoft, primarily on Azure Container Apps. That was a product that I helped bring to market. So next up in the agenda, let's just do a quick hackathon overview. So I know most of you are probably, you read up a little bit about the hackathon and what to expect, but I do want to go over all of the basics so that there is no confusion. And once again, it just provides an opportunity for you to ask questions if you have them. So really the whole goal of this is we want to give you the flexibility and freedom to build any kind of AI-powered application that you're interested in, right? You might have a very particular niche scenario that you want to try out, and we want you to be able to do that. So we made the constraints of the challenge extremely clear and very fundamental in terms of your main goal is just using Dapr workflows in some capacity. And that can either be directly using the Dapr Workflow API that we just mentioned, which is stable as of Dapr 115, or I believe 114, which one did it become stable in? Mark your own, was it 115?
Is it 115? Yes, the release just came out.
Perfect, yeah. So feel free to play around with that. Really exciting. We've made a ton. We had a great team on the Dapr side that's made a ton of performance improvements and optimization. So super excited for you to try that out. And then essentially Dapr Agents is an SDK wrapped around the underlying Dapr Workflow primitive. So if you're using Dapr Agents, you're using Dapr Workflow under the hood, especially if you're doing things like multi-agent scenarios. So we really want you to see how the combination of these two things can be used. Now, one of the considerations that I want to put out there is Dapr Agents today is specifically a Python SDK. So if you're looking to author applications in another language, most likely you'll want to go with the core Workflow API. And then you can basically use other AI capabilities that are instrumented using that Workflow API capability. So for example, there is I believe a sample that's out there that Mark Duker, one of our developer advocates, has created where he uses Dapr Workflows with the Conversation API. So that can be a really good example of using those core APIs together to get an intelligent experience without necessarily using the Dapr Agents SDK. So and then really the second piece of this is how you're going to develop and interact with Dapr. So we have Dapr open source, which is ultimately, the core path that most developers use when they're working with Dapr. But as Mark mentioned, at Diagrid, we also have Catalyst, which is essentially the easiest way to get up and running with Dapr. We've done a lot of work to make it very seamless in working between Dapr and Catalyst. So if you're interested in maybe a scenario that breaches beyond the confines of a Kubernetes cluster, I recommend checking out Catalyst. So for example, if you have an idea where you might want to span multiple compute platforms or do something multi-cloud, Catalyst can be a really good way to show some of that capability because it allows you to access the Dapr APIs through a centralized control plane managed for you by Diagrid. So we're going to dive into what these technologies are. I know we're not probably going to have time today to get as deep as we want, but I'm also going to give you a set of calls that we have established every every week, where you can join, and we're going to be doing demos of the different capabilities we have, trying to get you inspired. And then also you can ask any questions, kind of like an open office hours. And yes, Babatunde, great question. We will also cover submissions and everything like that. So stay tuned. So now that you know what the challenge is, we gave some ideas around themes that you can align your challenge application to. So for example, distributed and edge intelligence, this could be a really good example of using maybe Catalyst to do some things at the edge without necessarily running Dapr, or if you wanted to do something kind of on a smaller piece of hardware that you have. We also have the concept of collaborative intelligence. This really lends itself to like multi-agent scenarios, or just the ability to kind of negotiate between various agents and what they return. So we'll talk a little bit about some samples that we have that you can use for reference there. Also just general AI workflows in the real world, right? I want to do like anomaly detection, or I want to do some kind of like healthcare triage process, and maybe there's a human in the loop element. That's really where the responsible AI systems comes into play. So how can we make sure that we're auditing it? How can we take advantage of some of the Dapr SDK resiliency capabilities? Do we want to potentially have like a human in the loop scenario where, particular things trigger an external action that we then wait for before the workflow proceeds? So all of these are really using fundamental capabilities and features that are exposed through both agents and workflow. So once again, get creative with the solution. And the goal is that it kind of falls within one of these categories. I will say the prizes are not necessarily categorically based. So the categories are just to help inspire you to pick a relevant category that helps you kind of hone in on a specific solution. So let's dive in a little bit to the Dapr development and hosting. As I mentioned, we have the Dapr option and we have the Catalyst option. I did just want to highlight, we do have a bonus prize of $500 that anyone can qualify for if you do use Catalyst as the engine through which the application is hosted. So just keep that in mind. If you're interested in maybe upping the ante a little bit and getting a little bit more of that prize money, we've incentivized trying out Catalyst and using Catalyst as a way for you to accomplish the challenge. So that's just something I wanted to highlight. So let's do a quick upskilling. Once again, we don't have all the time in the world. I want to make sure that you do get all of the submission criteria, what the next steps are from a registration completion perspective. But I did want to make sure that you at least fundamentally understand the core capabilities and technology that we just mentioned in the previous slide. So if you've never heard of Catalyst or you've never heard of Dapr Agents, I just wanted to give a brief overview. So ultimately, once again, can anybody in the chat just would be curious, drop if they're new to Dapr or have not used Dapr before. So just if you're a newbie, maybe drop it in. I think we have 10 or so people, 14 or so people on the call. So if you're new to Dapr, okay, great. So we have at least one person new to Dapr. I'll just give kind of a very high level 1,000-foot view. And once again, this is just to enable you to then go do the exploration during the hackathon. But ultimately, in a traditional Dapr deployment setting, in a traditional Dapr use case prior to anything that Diagrid provided, Dapr essentially runs as a sidecar in Kubernetes. So you'll have your application can be authored in any language. We have SDKs to pretty much cover anything. So it's very flexible in that regard. That API or that SDK, that developer library exposes a set of APIs that are essentially exposed on this sidecar. So you have your deployment manifest in Kubernetes, you've got your image with your application. You would also have a Dapr sidecar that can be injected into that deployment. And what it does is it literally exposes a set of developer-centric APIs to do developer-oriented microservice building type of capabilities. So for example, I want two applications to be able to interact with each other over MTLS. I can use the Dapr SDK. I can use a Dapr client to essentially invoke another application. So we see that Dapr invoke call. That's the HTTP API. We also have gRPC APIs, and that's traditionally what's used by the SDKs is that gRPC endpoint. We also have other capabilities. So beyond just doing things like service invocation, this is where you can use APIs for things like PubSub or state management, even workflows, as we've mentioned, and now recently the conversation API. So Dapr really acts as an abstraction layer so that your code can stay extremely portable and you can build very quickly without bringing all of the infrastructure that would traditionally be required for those things into your application code. So if I want to publish a message, it doesn't have to go directly to Redis using the Redis SDK. It can go to the standard publish endpoint through the Dapr sidecar, and then I can essentially load what's called the Dapr component, which points me to the underlying infrastructure that I'd like to use. So it makes a plug and play model really possible. It makes swapping out that underlying infrastructure really flexible. And my developers get a really small attack surface and a very small set of code that they have to write in order to accomplish things that would otherwise be a lot more involved. And then on top of that, you really get a lot of cross-cutting concerns out of the box, things like open telemetry integration, SPIFFE identities for your MTLS integrations and access control. So you get a lot of really cool primitives that are baked into these APIs that make the overall solution of Dapr even more powerful than just the infrastructure abstraction. So ultimately, it's a set of developer APIs exposed through a sidecar that's running on Kubernetes. So that's ultimately at a high level how Dapr works from the 1,000-foot view. So if we dive a little bit into this next slide, I want to talk a little bit about like what this looks like in practice. So for example, let's say I'm traditionally authoring with that Redis SDK. You can see here that, and I only brought one of these slides over, so I'm missing one. But traditionally I would have the Redis SDK, but here we can see what it looks like to maybe talk to Redis using Dapr instead. So instead of importing the Dapr or the Redis SDK, instead you can see here I've imported the Dapr client, and I'm using that Dapr client to save state. So you can see that client save state call. That's now replacing all of the custom, native logic that I would need to talk to Redis. And why this is powerful is because this code is very portable, right? If I change Redis on the back end to Cosmos DB in production, I don't have to change the application code. So the developer gets a really streamlined interface, and I, as the platform engineer or the person responsible for infrastructure, can make decisions that no longer impact the development team quite as directly. So how does this actually know to talk to Redis? Like, let's say, okay, I want to use this client, but I don't necessarily see any Redis dependencies. How do I know that I'm using Redis? Well, in this case, you'll see this component concept. So here you can see a Dapr component actually looks like. That Dapr component has a type, and you can type estate.redis, and then I can pass in certain configuration parameters which dictate how my Dapr sidecar will talk to Redis and some of the other settings on that API call. So that's kind of the main core premise that I just explained on the previous slide, where I have the client SDK, I have the library, I have the developer using this simple interface, and then I have this concept of a Dapr component. And then ultimately, to get up and running, I'm going to run this with local Dapr tooling. So when you're in the hackathon, you're doing interloop development, you're going to get, you're going to do a Dapr init, you're going to get Dapr set up on your machine, you're going to have a Dapr YAML manifest, most likely, which allows you to launch all of your applications and the sidecars, and you can go through and iterate on that process in order to make changes to your application. So this is traditionally what it looks like when you're working with Dapr. So I want to talk now about the key technologies. So we understand Dapr. So what are the key technologies for this challenge? One of them is Dapr Workflow. So if you've never used Dapr Workflow before, and once again, feel free to ask questions throughout. We have people that are hopefully fielding those questions. So is there any questions right now that needs to be addressed in the chat that I can hit on? Let's see. Oh, we already answered this, so I'm just going to say start live answer, stop live answer. Cool. So it says we live answered it. Okay, great. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat. Mark and Yaron have got you. Just wanted to make sure. Okay, perfect.
We got them.
Cool. Sounds good. So okay, great. So let's hop back in. Dapr Workflow is ultimately, like we said, a stable API in Dapr as of 1.15, and it allows durable, long-running execution of business processes. So this is extremely powerful. Almost all applications have some form of workflows that need to be coordinated, inputs that need to impact other outputs, transactional information that needs to execute either as a success or a failure. And a lot of this goes into also what Mark mentioned about around saga patterns and compensating transactions, right? A lot of that can be managed when you have these kind of workflow primitives. So the way that this works is we have support in C#, Java, Python, JavaScript, and Go, which is really exciting. We've expanded that. And you can essentially, it is code first. So you have a lot of flexibility over how you author these workflows in order to accomplish your objective, whether that's chaining a set of activities, fanning out and fanning in, waiting for external events, as I mentioned before, doing things like durable timers, which allow you to, potentially pause that workflow execution, wait for 48 hours, and then, either act on a timeout or take a certain action. Maybe you fail it after 48 hours if someone hasn't confirmed their email. Those are the kind of things that durable timers allow you to do. And then you can also do other more complex things or other types of relationship mapping, like kicking off a child workflow from within a parent workflow, continuing a workflow as new. All of these are really baked into the underlying workflow model. And how this works, which I think is important to call out, just since you will be interacting with this a lot, you're probably going to wonder, okay, what does this look like in practice? How does this work? So for example, you're going to have your workflow, and that workflow is using the Dapr Workflow SDK. So as I mentioned, we have support in a variety of different languages for authoring workflows, but you're going to use that Dapr Workflow authoring SDK. And within your application code, you're going to use that Dapr Workflow SDK to actually define the set of steps and the execution path for your workflow logic. And that typically is broken down into a set of activities. So you have your workflow calling a set of activities, and each of those activities is what is actually doing things like external API calls or complex computation. None of that is going to be in your actual workflow body. It's going to happen within these activities. And ultimately, workflows behave deterministically. So as you're authoring and iterating, this is something to keep in mind with Dapr. If you're going to add a new activity, for example, and you want to have the same result, right, you're most likely going to want to have some kind of versioning mechanism, whether that's appending that to the workflow name is most likely the best case scenario for you to do that, because you might want to have multiple versions of a workflow running. But once again, if you make changes, they're no longer deterministic. So you need to make sure that you have a versioning mechanism, be it that changing the name maybe of the Dapr workflow name itself. That can be a good strategy for versioning your workflows as you're iterating. And then also the Dapr workflow engine. This is the big part that is brought to you by the underlying Dapr runtime. So within the sidecar, we actually have a Dapr workflow engine embedded. And this is what's going to manage all of the execution of your workflow logic and activity logic. It's going to be the thing that manages the replenishing of state whenever a timer is hit, right? We need to unload that workflow from memory, reload it whenever the timer, comes up to time. And so all of that's really being managed by the brains of the operation, which is the workflow engine. And ultimately, all of this is powered by an append-only data stream, right? So all of this is being stored within the sidecar. So you have the ability to, well, not really within the sidecar, I guess I should say, based on the state management primitive that you use. So you can bring your own Dapr state store, which allows the workflow engine to operate over a particular data store. But the Dapr sidecar is going to manage that. So we'll take a look at what that looks like, but ultimately you enable your actor state store. That's what the Dapr engine is going to use to store all of your workflow state so that it can essentially provide this durable model. So this is what it looks like at runtime. Ultimately, I can call my workflow directly on the sidecar, or I can make a call through the Dapr Workflow Management SDK to actually kick off a new workflow. That's going to initiate my application's initiating a gRPC stream to that Dapr sidecar. And basically we have bidirectional communication. So my Dapr sidecar is telling the SDK what operations it should take, and the results are getting returned from the workflow back to the workflow engine, and all of that's being persisted in your state of choice. So keep that in mind. Cool. This is where we're going to talk about Composer a little bit. This is super exciting. And this is also going to be part of a bonus challenge as well. So as of yesterday, a big shout out to Felinto and Sam, our AI team here at Diagrid, who I think are on the call right now. They've been hard at work to build a really cool, intuitive experience for getting up and running with Dapr workflows. So instead of just starting from scratch and saying, how am I going to go and build this? Yes, it's easy. We have quick starts to make it easier for you. But what you can actually do is you can chart out, even potentially in drawing, and you can say, here's what I kind of want to do in my workflow, and here's where I might want to have, a human in the loop experience. And you can do that using traditional like BPMN or mermaid diagrams, but you can also use, once again, handwritten diagrams that you upload. And then ultimately, this is going to generate all of the scaffolding that's needed with additional logic as well, just to help you get up and running and get started for how you can start actually executing that workflow right away. So pick the language of your choice, ideate on your workflow, plug that in, and then ultimately you're going to get this great output. So super excited about this, the endpoint workflows.diagrid.io. And we did integrate a bonus challenge into the hackathon. And what the goal of that bonus challenge is for you to be transparent and also be really creative in terms of how you actually use AI to empower you to build an AI app. So obviously we know that there's Cursor, we know that there's Windsurf, we know that there's Claude. There's a lot of tools out there that are optimizing the experience of, vibe coding and getting up and running. So it'd be really great in your demonstration, if you're interested in this bonus prize, tell us what your inner loop looks like. How are you using AI to actually generate the code, help you iterate, help you get creative? And obviously expectations will be high because you're going to be able to do more in a shorter period of time. Yeah, vibe coding. I see people have very different opinions about this, but ultimately I am interested in kind of seeing how do you use AI to enable you to build this solution. So that's another bonus criteria. If you're interested in bringing that into the mix, we'd love to see how you make use of it. And obviously the workflow generator can be a really good example of how you're able to bootstrap your project. So keep that in mind. Okay, awesome. Want to dive a little bit into Dapr Agents. We won't go too deep into this. We're going to finish out the slides, and then hopefully with the time I have left, I'm just going to start doing a few demos. I know you're probably really interested to see some demos, but I also feel like the most critical thing for this session is for you to walk away feeling successful and understanding of what the requirements are for the hackathon. So we'll go through all the slides, and then we will do demos with whatever time is left. But we also do have an event on May 21st, which is going to be mid next week, where we'll also use some time to kick off the call, do demos of these various technologies, and make sure that you feel inspired by them and you can ask questions about them as well. So Dapr Agents is essentially built on top of Dapr Workflow, which is what I mentioned earlier in the call. And it really allows you to do this kind of data-driven agents, multi-agent system type of implementation. And a lot of it's backed by Dapr PubSub. So as you play around with Dapr Agents, you'll get more familiar with how that paradigm actually works and how it uses all of the existing Dapr primitives like PubSub and Workflow to actually coordinate this kind of multi-agent system. Yeah, Willem, thanks for joining, by the way. Just a quick pause. He's also introduced himself with quite a grandiose introduction in the Discord channel. So I would love for everyone to go in and just follow his lead. He did a great job giving us insight into his ideas and background. So we'd love for you to make sure that you introduce yourself in Discord. So yes, thanks for joining. We'll see you throughout the hackathon. And once again, biggest call out here, it's available in Python. So if you're a Python developer or dabbling in the agent space, traditionally Python is the primary language for that. So definitely, if you're interested in stretching your capabilities, we're interested in seeing what you can contribute. So Dapr Agents is like really interesting in that it builds over this sort of React pattern, and really you're able to build these agents using these Dapr underlying primitives for them to go through this like reasoning, planning, and action process, which probably a lot of you are hearing this React pattern. And that's ultimately what you can do with Dapr Agents, right? You have some tools that are given to you out of the box that you can use, like LLM integration, being able to call out to an LLM provider, but you can also add and bring your own tools and think about how your agents can make the best decisions based on the tools that are available to them. So it's very similar to what you're seeing in the industry today, which is what's so exciting about it, is that it's very comparable to a lot of these other frameworks, but provides a lot more of this flexibility because it already has that Dapr durable foundation, which is really, really cool. So I think we kind of touched on this, but ultimately, your agent is able to store memory. All of that's happening through Dapr State Management. So just another example of how we're integrating with these underlying Dapr APIs to make this particular agent SDK super, super powerful. So this is an example of sort of like what a tool chain call will look like. In this case, it's a weather example, but I've also posted on my LinkedIn, if you saw it, an example where it's a group of Lord agents, and they're all basically talking almost like they're in a chat, trying to figure out how to answer your particular question, whether it's how do we get to Mordor, or what's the best, like one of the questions I asked it, what's the best game that we can play while we're on the road to keep our minds off of like any impending doom. And it's so fun to see how these different agents with their prompt-based backgrounds and with their characterizations can actually contribute different interesting insight to the conversation. It's just really, really exciting. And when you think about that in the context of business scenarios, it can be super, super powerful. But you can see in this case, basically the user comes in, has a prompt saying basically like, what's the weather in Virginia? This is what I'm interested in. The LLM is then going to process like, what's the available tools available to me that I can use to basically answer this question or get to a response for this particular prompt. So once that happens, an agent is then going to execute the tool call. It's going to get a response like the weather in Virginia is 80. And then that's obviously happening behind the scenes using some kind of tool that actually provides information on the weather. And then that LLM is going to then kind of take that insight and respond back to the user in a way that is human centric, right? And isn't just like the raw data payload. So this is ultimately kind of what you're going to be able to build with Dapr Agents when you're doing that multi-agent coordination, multi-agent tool calls. And what's cool is we can actually get visualization on top of this if we're using Catalyst. So I'll show you an example of that here in just a few minutes. So that's ultimately a little bit of just like a high level overview of Dapr Workflows and Dapr Agents. And then ultimately just wanted to kind of call out the difference between using Dapr Upstream and Catalyst. So if you're unfamiliar with Catalyst, as we've been talking this whole time, we've talked about how Dapr is traditionally hosted on Kubernetes as a sidecar. So the way that works, your application is talking to Dapr over local hosts. It's unencrypted because it's all happening within that pod network. And you're ultimately just hitting those APIs either directly through the HTTP endpoint or gRPC endpoint, or through the SDK, which traditionally wraps that gRPC endpoint. So that's how we traditionally run Dapr. If you're looking to use Catalyst, what's really interesting is you don't have local Dapr dependencies. So I'm basically offloading all of Dapr to a remote engine or a remote SaaS platform through Catalyst, through Diagrid. So I have my application code. That application code can be running anywhere. And then I make an encrypted HTTPS call to a Catalyst project, which is where my remote sidecar is hosted. And that really unlocks the Dapr capabilities because I'm no longer having to run my application code and my Dapr sidecar in a pod on Kubernetes. So just keep that in mind. It's really cool because not only does it unleash this different deployment model, but it also does have some really cool tooling, which makes it compelling, especially if you're going to be iterating over workflows and want to get a more visualization on top of that. So just wanted to call that out. We won't go too much into the rest of Catalyst just for time's sake, but I will show you a demo at the end, and I'm going to share these slides out. So I think I've touched on it briefly. Just keep in mind, Catalyst provides some additional developer-centric capabilities and visualization on top of also centralizing that Dapr hosting and allowing you to offload the responsibility of these sidecars directly to the Catalyst platform. So hackathon preparation, gonna take a pause. Any questions that anyone wants to drop in the chat? I don't think everyone can come off mute, so just please keep in mind if you want to just digest that, if there's anything you want to drop in the chat, now would be a great time. So I'll pause here for a second just to see if we have any questions. It doesn't look like we do. So I'm going to keep going. Awesome. So hackathon preparation. If you want to get the details for the hackathon, and all of the major resources are going to be at Diagrid Labs Dapr AI Hackathon on GitHub. This is where you can see the timeline, the challenge categories, the judging criteria, the submission criteria, all of the registration criteria, all of the rules. So I just want to emphasize this is going to be the one-stop shop for almost every single thing that you need to know about the hackathon. I'm going to continue updating it with new resources. I'm going to add this content to it, but this should really be your one-stop shop. If you have a question, if you have any issues finding information, we have Discord. You're welcome to open an issue on the repo itself, but this should provide you with like all the context you need from submissions to prizes and everything in between. Read the rules. So this is important, and I just want to hyper-emphasize this. There are eligibility rules, and so I do want you to read through this. There are certain countries where we're not able to do like financial payout, for example. So if I just want you to keep that in mind, make sure that you read through, you understand the eligibility criteria. If you registered, you did agree that you had already read the rules, but I just want to hyper-emphasize if you ever want to return back to the rules to make sure that everything that you submit meets eligibility criteria, please make sure to reference back here. And this also gives insight into how we manage payouts and things like that. So just, this is going to be your one-stop shop from a legal perspective around how the hackathon is being coordinated, how payouts will work, etc. If you have not registered, make sure you finish registering. So you have to complete the hackathon registration form. Even if you're working with a teammate, please make sure that your teammate has filled out this form. So once again, this can be found at the Diagrid WS Dapr AI Hackathon link. Most of you have already registered, which is how you got this invitation. If you haven't registered, make sure to do so and make sure to share this with anyone who you're interested in collaborating with. So getting connected, this is the next step. So once you've completed the registration form, you have all of the details in the GitHub repos. Let's talk about how you can get connected. So please join the Diagrid Discord. If you join the Diagrid Discord and you don't see this Dapr AI Hackathon channel, you can go into your Discord settings. Make sure that you've selected events. So when it says like, what are your channels and roles? If you look here on the left side of this panel, you can add a role that says, I want to see events, and you can also search through all the channels. Just make sure that you have added this channel because this is ultimately where all of the hackathon communication is going to take place. As I mentioned, Willem really blew us out of the water by doing a very comprehensive introduction. So please go introduce yourself to other hackathon participants. It's great to build a community here so that we can ideate, iterate, those kind of things all as a collective community. We also have an announcements channel. So this will be where we put any major announcements, if there's any updates that you need to be aware of. We also have a hackathon questions channel. This is a great place to come in if you have a question about Catalyst, a question about agents. If you have a question about Catalyst, if you're having an issue, feel free to open a question there. I've also put guidelines within that forum as to when you should potentially open an issue on a respective GitHub repo. So I'll talk about that as well. But really feel free to ask any questions that you have at any time. This is all async. So we want to make sure that we're accommodating you and we have a team swarming around to answer any questions that you have. We also have a team finder channel. So if you are interested in collaborating with the team, I will say, I do think team collaboration in an asynchronous hackathon can be extremely challenging, mostly because people are in different time zones. You have variable availability. So I do recommend, unless you know the teammates, it might be a little bit more challenging. However, if you're interested in having collaborators, feel free to drop it there and maybe even specify things like, I'm looking for someone in this time zone. Feel free to jump on board if you're interested. But once again, I do think it traditionally creates less friction if you work as an individual on these virtual challenges. And then the last channel that you'll see here is the Dapr AI Hack Room. This is where we're going to be joining at least once a week to run a virtual office hours / virtual hack hours call. We will also potentially be open to doing them across time zones if we see them being valuable. But you can also just jump in here at any time. So if you're hacking away and you want someone to you just want to hack with a couple other people, this is basically a voice and video channel where you can join and hack together, but this will be where our events are hosted weekly. All right, awesome. So this goes into the joining of events. On the GitHub repo, I have created an events section. This is where you can actually go in and register not only for just those virtual hack room events, but also for Dapr community calls, which I highly recommend. We typically cover a lot of topics related to Dapr and updates. You can see demos, so definitely join that. So I added those here. And then we also do have an in-person hackathon happening in Seattle this next week at Microsoft Build. So if you happen to be there, we'll be doing one in person, but our goal is that hopefully throughout the hackathon, or even beyond this, we'll be able to do more localized in-person events as well. But make sure to add these to your calendar, especially if you have questions. This will be a really good time to ask those. All right, getting resources. So within your GitHub repo that I've once again set as your source of truth, I've gone ahead and curated a good number of resources around agents, around workflow, around the workflow composer, around Catalyst. This isn't an exhaustive list. I definitely personally would like to go in today and add some additional resources just to make sure that it makes discoverability easier for you. But I have started that there. So I will be updating that. I'll also have people on my team PR that README so that you can go in and get as many comprehensive resources as possible, as many example projects as possible. But this is a really good place to start. I want to highlight the Building Effective Dapr Agents repo that my colleague Bilgin, who I believe is on the call, created. It's really, really good. So if you're looking to use the Agents SDK specifically, and you really want to kind of get a more holistic understanding of how you can go about authoring them using these traditional agent-based patterns, it is a really, really strong resource that I highly recommend you check out. So that's where you can find opportunities to skill up and learn. Catalyst organization access. So if you signed up and have already registered, and if you have any issue and this hasn't happened for you, please let me know on Discord. But ultimately, within 2 hours of registering for the hackathon, you should have gotten an invite to a Catalyst organization. Some of you probably already have one, but it is on the free plan. So we did go ahead and auto provision accounts that have additional resources for you in case you want to push the limits a little bit more. So we're going to be ongoing, iterating. We want to make sure that you have enough resources. It also has the ability for you to add additional users. So on the free plan, it's an individual plan. However, we've given you the ability to add up to 5 other teammates. So if you are collaborating, I would recommend making sure that you use the organization we've invited you to. And within Catalyst, you can actually switch between organizations. So if you have a free organization and the hackathon organization, no problem. You can easily switch between the two of those in the UI. Let's see. Got a question. Looks like it's a question for your own, so I'll let him answer that question. Awesome. So please feel free to use Catalyst. Once again, no pressure, but you have access to it should you want to explore and investigate that product. All right, get hacking. So we're almost at the end here. Then we'll pause a few minutes for questions, and then I'll just show you a couple of quick examples so that you can see some of the core things that you're going to be playing around with in the next couple of weeks. So the main thing, raising bugs. So it's an open source project. Dapr Agents is also fairly new. It was announced in March. So there is still ongoing work being done to not only add new features, but to improve the existing features. So just be conscientious of the open source mentality of how bugs should be opened within an open source community, right? The best way to do that, be descriptive and open an issue on the respective repos. So if you're running into an issue with the Python SDK or with the Java SDK, most likely it makes sense for you to open an issue on that respective repo. You can also consider opening issues on the Dapr repo if there's a feature request that you have or something that's more all-encompassing that you're running into on the runtime side. And then ultimately, there's also the Dapr Agents repo. So if it's specific to agents that you're running into an issue, opening it there provides the best visibility for the maintainers of those projects. For Catalyst bugs, we have a Catalyst-specific repo that you're welcome to open issues on. But ultimately, we want to make this streamlined for you. We don't want you to have to be opening issues on a ton of different repos. But hopefully, you won't run into too many issues as you're iterating. Feel free to also drop this in the Discord questions as well. So the goal is just start with GitHub, open an issue, provide the context, provide any kind of reproduction steps you have, and then you can open a Discord issue that you say, hey, I'm running into this issue. Can someone help me escalate this? Because I and my team will work on escalating and helping fix some of these upstream and catalyst issues so that we can be as proactive as possible in getting you unblocked, right? Because we obviously want you to be successful with the hackathon. So just please be transparent, open the issues early and often when you're seeing behavior, and we will get to the bottom of it. I think I already answered that. Okay, submission process. So I know this was a question that we had from Babatunde. How do we submit? So ultimately, this is what I want you to keep in mind. And I think this is important. And I think this might be the slide perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing I've been looking at all of you in the chat so that I could have visibility, but I'm going to switch over my screen share and just get into where I'm actually pulling a few things up. So let me just switch this over really quick here. I'm going to close out of this PowerPoint, move this webinar window over, and then, okay, perfect. So I'm going to now share my other desktop, and you should be able to see my entire screen at this point. So awesome. I want to walk you very quickly through I believe it's here, through the submission process and what this looks like. So the biggest thing, if you have filled out the registration form but have not finished these other steps, you are technically not eligible for prizes. So that is one really big point I want to make. The registration process, while you are registered, there are other prize eligibility requirements as part of this registration process. Fill out the form, join the Diagrid Discord, and then start your project. So what does it mean to start your project? Everyone should be cloning the official Dapr Agents project submission template repository. And ultimately, this is where we would like for you to be hacking on your project, right? This is where we want you to actually go in, fill out the template. What's your project name? What's the summary of your project? What category? What technology are you using? What are the features? What's the architecture? What's the demo link to your video? So this is basically the scaffolding for your submission. And I personally recommend just putting your application code into this repo directly, because if you want to iterate privately, which I completely understand, the best way for us to be able to see and get insight into your project is by adding the judges directly and the organizers. So I understand not everyone wants to iterate on their project in the open because you are competing for prizes. So what you're going to do as part of this registration, and I recommend just going ahead and doing this today, is going into the GitHub repo and making sure that you have met all of these eligibility requirements. So go into the official project template. What you're going to do is you're going to say, use this template. You're going to say, create a new repository. You're going to give it the name of your particular project, and then you're going to add your own and myself to that GitHub repository. So what this will mean is that we have access. We might request access to a couple other people if you're running into issues, but ultimately this is the best way for you to iterate on your code in a private repo, while also giving us visibility into the context of your project so that we can best support you throughout the process. So this is where you're going to iterate on your project. And this is where all of the requirements for things like giving us the architecture, giving us the installation instructions and the README, all of that can live in this repo. And once again, it can be public if you're open to it being public. It's completely up to you in terms of what you're building. Once you are done, so let's say once you're done, it's the submission deadline, June 27th at 11:59 p.m. PST. When you are completed and you're ready to submit, what you can go in and do is create an issue, and you're going to say new issue, and you're going to say project submission. And this is where you're going to say, here's the name of my project, and here's the link to my templated repository, right? Here's my project submission repository. This is the category, and here are my teammates. And then you're basically going to say, I understand my submissions judged based on the state of the code at this time. I've already included all of the required submission criteria in this repo, and I've read the official contest rules. This is just a reminder of the requirements for submission. Then you'll create that issue. So then you can kind of go through and actually see who all you're competing with, who all is submitted. You're able to do this as early as you're done, because once again, if this repo is private, then people still will know that you submitted, but they won't be able to see the contents of that submission. So it's flexible in that regard. Is this video being recorded and will it be shared afterward? 100%. Absolutely. And all of this as well, just to be very clear, is extremely well laid out within this repo. So for example, I say, share your project using the official template, click the use this template button to create a new public or private repository, name your repository, add these GitHub handles. And then I also have the submission guidelines. So once you go in here, you'll say, here's the submission guidelines. You need to submit this using the project submission template. And then within the project submission template that you clone, it also tells you how to use it. So this should be pretty straightforward if you read through this content. If you need any or have any questions or you need any help, once again, please feel free to drop it in Discord. But it should be fairly straightforward based on the context given in the main Diagrid Labs hackathon repo. So all of this is contained here, and we will upload in this section, we'll upload this video along with this PDF. And I'll also put a more in-depth slide of expectations around project submission. So that should hopefully help there. Okay, cool. Sounds good. Sounds like we answered that question. All right, we've got 10 minutes left. Anybody have any questions, or do you want me to just show you a quick little, I'll show you a couple quick little demonstrations. It won't be all end to end, which I apologize for, but once again, we'll do one of those on the upcoming call on the 21st. But one thing I wanted to show you here is this is an example of using agents with Catalyst. So once again, I just want to kind of show you what some of the benefit of this is. So we talked a little bit earlier about the underlying Dapr, in your Dapr Agents SDK, on the underlying side, it's actually using workflows to orchestrate the underlying calls to each of the respective agents. So that's what you're actually seeing here. So you can imagine this is kind of powerful. I can go into, I can actually see the input and output of a particular workflow iteration. And I can also see things like this. Like I can go in and see what are the various steps in the workflow, what are the inputs and outputs of that step, which is really cool and powerful. And we'll continue iterating on this UI as well. It looks like here we're missing the scroll bar. But ultimately, you can also go in and see the historical context of a given workflow. So I can kind of see what the execution started with, what the input was. I can also see things like this, which is really interesting. If you remember when I was talking about Dapr Agents before, one of the things that Dapr Agents will do is it will essentially have an orchestrator, and that orchestrator is determining which agent should receive the next call. It's doing that by saying, oh, look, I have 3 agents available to me, and these are all stored in an agent registry using Dapr key value stores. And based on this agent registry and what I have available and what the insights and goals of each of these agents are, I can then decide which agent I want to call next and what the instruction to that agent is going to be. So it's really, really cool, right? The Dapr Agents SDK is really powerful, but it can also kind of be a little bit hard to understand exactly how all of the coordination is happening behind the scenes. So I highly recommend just considering using something like Catalyst to be able to help you to do that. And what's cool about this is if I go into, let's say, this agents demo, I just want to show you what the code actually looks like. And if you saw my link post, you may have seen this because I did a little GIF of this. But I'm using this orchestrator workflow, and what's this LLM orchestrator workflow to kind of call out to my agents using this SDK. And you can see that I'm basically importing this LLM orchestrator from the Dapr Agents package. And you can see I'm then inheriting from that and creating this workflow service. And it has a name, right, which is LLM orchestrator. And if we're looking at Catalyst, which I'm going to put these side by side, I know I have a big monitor here, so I'll try to zoom in as best as possible. But we can see, if I go back here, that I actually have a LLM workflow type. So that type correlates to this particular LLM orchestrator workflow. And within this, I'm using something like a message pub sub to coordinate all of the underlying interactions between my agents so that I can broadcast a message to the agents and it can be picked up by the respective agent that's interested. And then you can also see this agents registry. This is where the LLM orchestrator is actually going and retrieving that list of available agents. So what's nice is in Catalyst, you get out of the box key value store and pub sub provider. It's pretty nice because you can actually store these things directly in Catalyst without deploying your own infrastructure. So this works similarly to how Dapr works with the out-of-the-box Redis components that are running on your local machine. But this just gives you an idea of where this data actually ties to. So you can see agent state store, agent registry, all of those are pointing to things in Catalyst. So this is all the code it is basically I'm saying, I'm going to give you a set of agents that you can use to execute these things. I'm going to give you a pub sub provider that you can use to orchestrate and project messages out to those respective agents. And then I'm going to tell you how many times I want you to iterate over the prompt in order to get to a solution and end the LLM orchestrator workflow. And then each of these respective agent apps Also super, super simple. So all I'm doing is basically saying, what's the name? What's the role that this plays? What's the overall goal of this agent? And then how does this agent behave? And that's what these instructions basically say. Like, this is how you are going to behave. And this is kind of the knowledge that you're going to use when responding to a particular call from the LLM orchestrator. And you can see it's using these same exact underlying infrastructure providers, all using Dapr PubSub, Dapr State under the hood, in order to get this intercommunication with the orchestration. And within that agents registry too, you'll also see here, let me see, where is this stored? We can see here, yeah, it actually is here. You can see in the agent registry, all of these say orchestrator false. All of the agents say orchestrator false. And the LLM orchestrator, which we know is this particular piece of code right here, you can see this LLM orchestrator, it says true. So this is how we know what the LLM orchestrator workflow is and which ones are, sub agents that are doing toolchain calls and which one is really responsible for leading the pack and helping coordinate this communication. So that just kind of shows an example of how Catalyst can be really powerful from like a workflow orchestration visualization perspective. And you can also see I have an example of just using the Dapr Workflow SDK. And you can see here, I can see all the various paths that my workflow has ever taken based on the execution history. So in this case, my workflow took this particular path, but another workflow instance may have taken a different path through the process. And so I can go in here and see which path did a workflow take based on runtime executions. So this is what's really powerful, I think, about Catalyst in this particular hackathon challenge. What's also really cool, just depending on which platform you're going to use, whether you're just going to iterate locally with Dapr or iterate with Catalyst, is you can use the same Dapr run file for both experiences. So in this particular example for the Mordor agents, which is just a Dapr Agents quick start, by the way, that I've added some additional capabilities to, you can see that I'm using this Dapr manifest called a Dapr YAML manifest, a Dapr.yaml or Dapr multi-app run file. And this manifest basically says, I want to run all of these applications at once, and I want to launch the local sidecar processes on my machine. So in order to run this, I would just do a Dapr run -f, and I would pass in the Dapr manifest or the Dapr multi-app run file. It's going to launch all my applications, launch all of my local sidecars, and then my application is basically up and running at this point, which I can show you here. If I go and hit this endpoint and say, I want to actually test a request, and let's say, what's the best, I like this one. What's the best game to play on the way to Mordor? Like, I've asked it really ridiculous things like, where should we stop for food? But if I send this in, and hopefully this will start for me, right? We see that the invocation is happening. And what I should start to see, if I'm not mistaken, and once again, sorry about this, this may not be the most, let's see, it looks like I'm running into some potential issues. This might be on my side, which I apologize. I've run this many, many times, but of course the demo gods may not be with me today. Make sure components set up. Okay, perfect. Let's see if it works. If not, it's definitely an issue on mine, which I apologize. I've run this so many times that, okay, looks like we're executing a few things. It looks like workflow failed. Okay, cool. So I've probably screwed something up here, so I apologize for that. But ultimately, right, I can use that Dapr manifest to basically instantiate this particular workflow path. And what I'll start seeing on this event viewer that I created is all of the agents that are interacting on the back end. But what's cool is I can use the same exact manifest to do a Dapr run, and I can pass in this particular file. So I can say file is Dapr llm.yaml, and then I can pass in a project name like agents Mordor, and I can use this exact same command and get the exact same experience. The only difference is all of the sidecars are going to be running in a Catalyst project like I just showed you here, instead of running on my local machine. So you get a very interoperable experience because you can run the same file on both platforms, which makes it really easy to even just test your Dapr example. So if you're going to use Dapr primarily for the deployment model, you can still just use the same file to run it in your Catalyst project to get the visualization element. So I recommend even potentially using both of them just because they're so easy to work with together. So apologies on my side that that's not working for me right now. I'm assuming I've I've messed something up with Redis or my local Dapr installation because I just updated my Dapr installation. So apologies for that, but we will be doing a really comprehensive end-to-end demo of this on the call on next Wednesday. So please join if you want to kind of see workflow generator to local Dapr to Catalyst. We'll have a demo of that ready for you, and I'll kind of bring in that team to answer any questions you might have. But with that being said, I think we're at time. Once again, we're going to send out a follow-up email with all of this information, the recording. I'll be continuing to update the GitHub repo with new information. But biggest ask, once again, is just make sure you go in and complete those registration steps if you haven't already. So go introduce yourself on the Discord. Go ahead and clone that official project repository, get it started so that we know that you're iterating and we can help you if you ever have any issues. But yeah, I'm excited. And if anybody doesn't have any questions, then we'll end the call here.